For today's class, we are going to be reviewing the present continuous. If you haven't seen my previous lesson focusing on the present simple, I recommend that you check that out because a lot of the concepts that we're going to review here are also reviewed in the present simple. The present continuous borrows some of the rules from the present simple and adapts it to its own tense. Okay, so it's important that you know the basics. If you know the basics, then this will be easier. For the present simple, I divided it into two lessons where we focused on the affirmatives, and then separately I talked about questions and negatives. For the present continuous, we're going to review everything in a single video because it's significantly shorter, and I personally think it's a little bit easier than the present simple just because the rules that it follows, you probably already know. Okay, the first thing that you need to know is for the present continuous, you're going to have two verbs that are working together. One of those verbs is going to be the verb to be. And this is what you need to know about the present simple. If you remember, in the present simple, we talked about the verb be having three different forms. So it could be am, it could be is, and it can also be are. Here, it's the same rule. So if you remember, am goes with I, is goes with third person singular, so he, she, it, and are goes with everything else, which is you, we, they. Okay? And this kind of works as a auxiliary verb. Okay? An auxiliary verb is more like a verb that helps or provides assistance, right? That's why it's an auxiliary. Now, the main verb that you're going to be working with is going to be this, for example, wearing, okay? It's called a present participle, as you can see highlighted here in the introduction paragraph. You don't really have to remember that, okay? You just have to know that it's going to be the verb with ing. Now, here's something that sometimes confuses people. Every time that you see the verb with the ending ing, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be present continuous. You have to pay attention to the word that comes before, okay? So for it to be present continuous, you need both the verb be and also the verb with ing, so the present participle. Okay, that's the main thing you have to focus on. If you don't have the verb be, then this is going to be different. Okay, or if you have the verb be in a different tense, for example, the past, then it's also going to be different. Let me read this example. Julie usually wears jeans, but today she's wearing a dress. This example has two parts to the sentence. The first part, Julie usually wears jeans, is present simple. Because you have Julie, then you have the verb with the S, which you already learned, wears, and then jeans. The second part is continuous. Again, you have the person, but in this case you have the verb be, and you also have the verb with ing. Okay. Now, as it mentions here at the beginning, you use the present continuous for actions that are continued, okay? Continued actions, which means normally it's going to describe an action that is in progress, something that is happening right now, and something that doesn't have interruptions. Okay, it's like one single continuous long action. You're focusing more on the duration of the action than on the action itself, if that makes sense. Okay. Here you have the summary for the structure. So subject, the verb be, corresponding verb be, and then the verb with ing called the present participle, and whatever else you add to the sentence. let's go through some of these examples. We are walking the dog. He is washing the dishes. They are talking on their phones. They're fighting with each other. She's relaxing at the moment. It's raining a lot outside. Okay? Again, very basic here. Everything starts with the subject, as you can see. Everything has the verb be, the correct form. And then everything has the present participle, so the verb with ing. You're going to notice the contractions on these three examples. If you remember, the rules for contractions are exactly the same as the present simple. So you combine, in this case, a subject with the verb be. Okay, you take away a letter, you put the apostrophe, replacing that letter, and it works out. Okay, good. Let's move on to the next page. Okay, on this page, we're going to focus on the spelling. Okay, spelling is the way that you're going to be writing. There's some rules that change the way you're going to be writing. If you remember in the present simple, there were some cases where instead of adding s, you had to add es, okay? Just for the word to make sense. So in this case, there are three cases, which are these three, because this first one is the normal, or it's the way most of the verbs are going to be working, okay? So again, the way most of the verbs work is you can add ing at the end of the base. So in this case, we have wear. In this case, wearing. Okay? You just write it how it is. Now, moving on to the first situation or the first scenario. When you have a verb, like in this case, choose, and the last letter is an E, as you can see, when you're going to be writing it with ing, you have to take away the E. Okay? You get rid of the E, you take it away. And then you add ing. So that's just a small change. The pronunciation is not affected, and that's for all of these. So the base is choose, and in this case, it's choosing. Okay? That doesn't change. Second case for the word tie. It's for verbs that are ending with these two letters. So as you can see, it's also ending with an E, but the letter that comes before the E is an I, like in the word tie. The way this is going to affect your writing, as you can see, is you're going to replace the I and the E with the letter Y. Okay? So you're changing these two and you're adding the letter Y. After you do that, you can follow the same rule, which is adding ing. And again, the pronunciation doesn't change. So you have tie and tying. Good. And now let's move on to this last example. This one's a bit more complex, not because it's difficult, but because it has more steps or more rules that you need to verify. So they give us the example shop, right? The verb shop. The thing you need to pay attention to here specifically is the last three letters of the verb. And those three letters have to be consonant, vowel, and consonant. So H is a consonant, O is a vowel, and then P is a consonant. So that's one rule. Okay, that's the first rule. If you have that rule, then you move to the second rule, which is focused on the pronunciation. In English, there are some parts of the word that sound stronger than others. Okay, the part of the word that sounds stronger is called stressed. Okay, if a word is stressed, it means it sounds stronger in that part. And you know how words are divided into syllables, okay? So you have to look for the stressed syllable in the word. In this case, shop only has one syllable because it's a short word. Then the stress is always going to be at the end because it's only one syllable. Okay. But if you have a longer word or you have a word that has multiple syllables, you need to pay attention that the stress or the strong sound is at the end of the verb. And this is going to be clear in one of the examples that we're going to review. But for now, that's what you need to know. If the stress is in the last syllable, that's the second rule. And then the third rule, which is more an exception, is to ignore this if the last consonant is W, X, or Y, as you can see here. Okay? If it's one of those three letters, then you just ignore everything. The change to the writing, if it follows these rules, is the last consonant is written twice. So you double or you duplicate the last consonant. So you can see we have the word shop, and in this case, shopping. It has the P twice, okay, because it follows the two rules, consonant to vowel consonant, and the stress is in the final syllable. Great. Now, let's review the examples, and I'm going to tell you what category each of these examples belong to, okay? They're opening a store next week. Harry is always lying to his mother. I am cutting some apples. My uncle is writing a novel. Terry is mopping the floor. My mother is baking us a cake. Okay, I'm going to leave the first one for the last example because it's the one I want to focus on. So let's start with lying. As you can see, lying has this letter Y, and it comes from the verb lie. Lie is written the same way that you write tie. So it follows this rule. Okay, you change the I and the E for the letter Y. You have lying. Cutting follows this. It comes from the word cut, which is with one T. But because it follows these two rules, right? C is a consonant, U is a vowel, T is a consonant, and then it only has one syllable, so the stress is at the end. You double the letter T and you have cutting. Okay. Writing comes from the word write, which ends with the letter E, like choose, write. So you take away the E and it's writing. The same thing happens for baking. Baking comes from the word bake, which ends in the letter E. So you take that away and you have baking. Now, mopping follows the same rule as cutting. Comes from the word mop, as you can see in the picture. And mop has M as a consonant, O as a vowel, P as a consonant, and it only has one syllable, so the stress is at the end. And you write the P twice, mopping. Okay. Now let's go back to the first example, which is the one I want to focus on. This is one of the exceptions to this rule because it doesn't follow both of the rules. Okay. And here's why. The base verb is open. Okay. Open is a short word, but it has two syllables. Okay. Open. Right? Those are the two syllables. When you say open, the beginning, the first syllable, is the one that has the stress because it sounds stronger at the beginning. Open. Okay. So it doesn't follow the rule of the stress, right? Because you need the stress to be at the end. but in open, the stress is at the beginning. However, it does follow consonant, vowel, consonant, because you have P, E, N, which is the sequence, okay? But because it doesn't follow both rules, you don't duplicate or you don't double the consonant. So when you're writing opening, it's written as the first category, okay? Opening, good. Let's move on to the third page. So the third page is going to focus on how to make questions. Here is where the knowledge of the present simple helps. Okay. If you remember with the present simple, for questions and for negatives, you had two possible situations. One with the verb be, and one with every other verb. Okay. For continuous, for the present continuous, you always have the verb be. Why? Because it's part of the structure. So you always need the verb be. And because you always have the verb be, then that means the rule is always going to be the same. And the rule is also the same as the present simple. Okay? So if you know how to make a question in the present simple, then you also know how to make a question in the present continuous. Let's take this example here. He is playing tennis. This is affirmative. Okay, you have the person or the subject, the verb be, your main verb, and then the rest of the sentence. When you make a question, is he playing tennis? You're going to notice that nothing new really happens as you don't add any new words. What you do is switch or swap the positions of the person, right, subject, and the verb be. So you're going to start your question with the verb be, and then you're going to add the subject. And then you're going to have everything else stay the same. So the main verb, the present participle, and then the rest of the sentence. Okay? Is he playing tennis? Good. It's the same rule that you should know from the present simple. Let's go ahead and read these. Are they going to the park? Is he cycling to work? Is she eating pizza? Are they working late? Where are we going today? Are you coming to the party? What are you eating for dinner? Is it raining outside? Okay. You're going to notice that in all of these, it's the same. You're going to start with the verb be, right? Are, is, are, It's all the same. You're going to have the person, they, he, she, they, you, right? It's all the same. And then you have the main verb. So you have going, cycling, eating, working, going, coming, eating, raining. Okay? Everything follows the same structure. And if you remember, for these two examples, where you have the word where and you have the word what, this is because it's an open question. We talked about open questions when we were learning about questions in the present simple. So it follows the same rule. You only need to add the question word at the beginning of the sentence. So where are we going today is an open question. What are you eating for dinner is an open question. Okay? Apart from that, everything is exactly the same to the present simple. So if you know how to make questions in the present simple, that's the same here. Let's move on to the final page. Okay, so for the final page, as you can see here, it's going to be for negatives. And again, the negative is exactly the same as how it works in the present simple. So if you know how to make negatives in the present simple, you know how to make negatives in the present continuous. I'm going to read this example first. He is wearing a tie, but he is not wearing a hat. Or you could also say, but he isn't wearing a hat. Okay. So this sentence has two parts. You have the affirmative at the beginning, which is he is wearing a tie. Again, very easy present continuous. You have the person, you have the verb be, and then you have the main verb wearing. Okay, follows the structure. When you go to the negative, if you remember in the present simple, when you had the verb be, you have to add not after the verb be, because that makes it negative. So again, in the present continuous, you always have the verb be because it's part of the structure. So the rule is always going to be the same. You're always going to add not after the verb be. And you will see that here. You have two options because you can use the contraction or you can just write the words separately. So he is not wearing, or it's the same thing if you say he isn't wearing. Okay? So not after the verb be makes it negative. Same thing as the present simple. The only thing you need to remember, which is also in the present simple, if you're going to use am as the verb be, then you need to separate the words because there is no contraction between am and not, right? The contraction amn't technically doesn't exist, so you can't use that. But for is and for are, it's your choice. You could do whichever. Let's read through the examples. He isn't walking the dog. They aren't singing well today. She isn't cleaning up her bedroom. They aren't looking where they're going. He isn't playing football today. We aren't taking the bus today. You aren't doing your job. James isn't reading his book. We aren't eating out this week. And you aren't doing well at school this year. As you can see for all of the examples, in this case, they all have contractions. You could use them separately if you want to. He is not walking the dog, or James is not reading his book. They are not looking where they're going. It's all exactly the same. And you will see the structures again for the negative, always the same. Start with the person or the subject, use the verb be, use not, and then use the main verb. Okay? You have the structure right here again. It doesn't change, so everything should be quite easy. I recommend reading through the examples, and the best form of practice you can have is trying to write your own sentences in continuous. Maybe even compare them to examples from the present simple and write your own examples in the present simple. Getting to know the difference or the similarities helps you learn the verb tenses better. Good luck with your learning endeavor, and I hope to see you for whatever next class I will be posting.